She lived surrounded by luxury, but carried a heavy silence. The new employee seemed perfect until she started to control her. Everything turned to fear, even inside her own home, and a whisper in the hallway changed everything. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. On the outskirts of London, where mansions hide behind high walls and iron gates, there is a house that looks like it came straight out of a decor magazine. Perfectly manicured gardens, a swimming pool that reflects the blue sky marble, floors that shine under the sunlight. Everything there breathes luxury, order and perfection, but as they say, not all that glitters is gold. And in that house, behind the impeccable facade, a young woman carries a weight that no one can see. Julia is 27 years old and is 7 months pregnant. Her rounded belly is the only thing that seems real in that scenario of appearances. She moves slowly through the spacious corridors, one hand always on her lower back, the other holding her belly as if protecting a precious secret. Her eyes, which once were bright and full of dreams, now carry a shadow that she tries to hide behind forced smiles. Frederick, her husband, is a 42-year-old man, tall, broad-shouldered, and with a confident posture. He inherited a construction company from his father and transformed the business into an empire. Buildings bearing his signature dot the city, each one a monument to his success. But success comes at a price. Frederick wakes before the sun rises and returns when the moon is already high. His conversations with Julia are limited to quick questions about how she's feeling, followed by a hurried kiss on her forehead before he disappears again. Julia's loneliness did not begin with the pregnancy, but was amplified by it. Before she could go out, meet friends, occupy her mind with small distractions. Now, with her body heavy and tired, she finds herself confined within those glass and concrete walls, and she is not alone. Martha is always nearby. Martha arrived at the house 6 months ago, shortly after Julia announced her pregnancy. Frederick hired her through an elite agency, those that promised discreet and efficient employees. Martha had impeccable references, an elegant posture, and a smile that conveyed confidence. In the first few days, she was everything she promised to be. Careful, attentive, always one step ahead of Julia's needs. But something changed. Or perhaps Martha merely revealed who she always was. The changes were subtle at first. A comment here, a suggestion there. "Don't you think you should control your weight better, Julia? Pregnant women who gain too much weight have complicated deliveries." Then came the chores. Small things, nothing absurd at first glance. Helping to fold kitchen towels, organizing books on the shelf, watering plants on the terrace. Martha always wrapped her requests in phrases that sounded like care. "It's good for you to move around, it's good for the baby. Staying still all day isn't healthy." Julia, who grew up in a simple family from the countryside of the Yorkshire Dales, was not used to having people work for her. At first, she felt uncomfortable asking for anything. So when Martha suggested she do a task, Julia accepted without questioning. After all, maybe it really was important to stay active. Maybe Martha was right. But the tasks became more demanding, and the comments sharper. One day, Julia was setting the table for dinner when she felt a strong dizziness. She held the edge of the table, breathing deeply, waiting for the world to stop spinning. Martha appeared at the dining room door, arms crossed, expression icy. "That's being dramatic, Julia. Your mother had 6 children and never complained of dizziness. You need to be stronger. Frederick deserves a wife who can handle things." Julia swallowed her tears. Was it really being dramatic? Was she being weak? After all, women get pregnant every day and continue their lives normally, don't they? Maybe she was exaggerating. Maybe Martha was just trying to help her be more resilient. At night, when Frederick finally came home, Julia tried to seem fine. She smiled, asked about his day, feigned interest in the details of meetings and contracts. Frederick barely looked at her. He was always with his cell phone in hand, his eyes glued to the screen, his mind far away. He trusted that Martha was taking care of everything, and Martha always confirmed this with a polite smile. "Everything is under control, Mr. Frederick. Julia is fine, just a little emotional, as is natural at this stage, But there was one person in the house who saw what no one else saw. Rose was the cleaner, a 50-year-old woman, grey hair tied in a tight bun, hands calloused from so much work. She had 4 children and knew the look of a woman suffering in silence. Rose saw when Julia leaned against the wall to keep from falling. She saw when she bit her lip to keep from crying. She saw when Martha, with that fake smile, ordered yet another absurd task. Rose couldn't do anything. She needed the job. She had bills to pay, children to support. And Martha had made it clear from the beginning who was in charge of that house. Any disobedience would be met with immediate dismissal. So Rose limited herself to small gestures. A glass of cold water discreetly left beside Julia, a cushion adjusted on the chair where she usually sat. Silent glances that said, "I see you, I know what's happening, but I can't do anything yet." Julia felt increasingly isolated. Her parents lived far away, in a small town in the countryside, and she didn't have the courage to worry them. The few friends she had in London had gradually drifted away. After all, she rarely could go out, and when she could, she was too tired. Julia's world had shrunk until it fit inside that mansion, and in that world Martha was queen. One afternoon Julia was in her room, trying to rest, when she heard voices coming from the hallway. She recognized Martha's voice, talking on the phone. The tone was different. It wasn't the sweet, controlled voice Martha used with Frederick. It was a harsh voice, full of suppressed anger. "Soon, this pregnancy will be over, and this house will be back in order. She has no idea what she put me through, but she will pay for everything." Julia felt her blood run cold. What was Martha talking about? What had she done to Martha? They barely knew each other before Martha was hired. Or did they? Julia tried to remember any previous encounter, any connection that could explain that hostility. But nothing made sense. She tried to talk to Frederick that night. He was in his office reviewing blueprints for a new project. "Frederick, I need to tell you something." She started slowly, her hands trembling. "About Martha. I think she doesn't like me. I heard her talking on the phone and she said strange things." Frederick didn't even look up from his papers. "Julia, you're very sensitive. That's normal in pregnancy. Martha is excellent at what she does. This house has never been so well organized. You should be grateful to have someone so competent taking care of everything. Now, please, I need to finish this here." Julia left the office with teary eyes. He didn't believe her, or worse, he didn't care enough to even listen. She went up the stairs slowly, each step weighing like a mountain. In the room, she lay on the bed and placed her hand on her belly. The baby moved, a gentle kick that made her smile for a brief moment. "At least you're here with me," she whispered. The days dragged on. Julia woke with the feeling that something bad was about to happen, but she didn't know what. Martha was more demanding, more impatient. The tasks increased, the comments became crueler. One day, Julia was trying to fold a large sheet alone. She stretched her arms, trying to reach the ends, when she felt a sharp pain in her abdomen. The pain was so intense that she dropped the sheet and put her hands on her stomach. She staggered, tried to lean on the bed, but her legs gave out. She fell to her knees on the floor, her breathing rapid, her heart racing. Rose entered the room at that exact moment. She dropped the broom and ran to Julia, helping her sit on the floor with her back against the bed. "Don't move, Mrs. Julia. Breathe deeply, slowly." Rose held Julia's hand, which was cold and trembling. The two stayed there in silence until the pain passed. Rose said nothing, but her eyes were wet. And Julia realized at that moment that she was not completely alone. That night, Frederick was hosting an important dinner at home. Important clients, investors, people who could change the course of his business. The table was set perfectly. Sparkling crystals, polished silverware, fresh flowers in the center. Martha supervised every detail. Julia was instructed to dress well and appear only for a few minutes, smile, greet the guests, and then discreetly withdraw. She descended the stairs carefully, wearing a navy blue dress that barely disguised her fatigue. The guests greeted her politely, but with little interest. She was just the pregnant wife, a decorative figure on that business night. Julia smiled, shook hands, murmured thanks. But then, as she was returning to the stairs, she felt lightheaded. The floor seemed to tilt, and before she could hold on to anything, the world went dark. When she woke up, she was lying on the living room sofa, surrounded by worried faces. Frederick was by her side, holding her hand, his face pale. Martha was behind him, her lips pressed into a thin line. The guests had moved away, embarrassed by the scene. Julia heard Martha say, with a voice that feigned concern but overflowed with irritation, "This happens to pregnant women who are too emotional. She needs to control her emotions better." But Frederick, for the first time in months, seemed genuinely concerned. "No, I'm taking her to the hospital now." He helped Julia to stand up, and even with Martha's protests saying it wasn't necessary, he insisted. In the car, as the city lights passed by the window, Julia felt a spark of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, someone would finally see her. Perhaps someone would believe her. Or was it already too late? Tell me your opinion of this story and how you think it will end. The private hospital was 20 minutes from the mansion, but to Julia it felt like hours. Every bump in the road made her stomach churn. Frederick drove in silence, his hands clenched on the steering wheel, his jaw tight. She watched him sideways, trying to decipher what he was thinking. Was it genuine concern or just fear that something might go wrong and tarnish his image? Julia hated having these thoughts, but the loneliness of the past few months had planted seeds of distrust in her heart. In the emergency room they were attended to quickly. Frederick's surname opened doors after all. A kind nurse led Julia to a private room, helped her lie down on the padded gurney, and began checking her vital signs. High blood pressure, irregular pulse, excessive swelling in her legs and hands. The nurse exchanged glances with the doctor who had just entered, a middle-aged man with grey hair and thin-rimmed glasses. Dr. Henry was his name, and he had a reputation for being direct, without beating around the bush. He examined Julia carefully, asked questions about her routine, her diet, her emotional state. Frederick was by her side, answering some questions that Julia hesitated to answer. No, she was not getting adequate rest. Yes, she remained active at home. No, he didn't know exactly what she did during the day, because he was always working. Dr. Henry wrote everything down, his face growing more serious with each note. After ordering a series of tests, he sat on a chair beside the gurney and looked directly at Julia. "Mrs. Julia, your blood pressure is dangerously high. You are showing clear signs of extreme stress and physical overload. In a 7-month pregnancy, this can be fatal both for you and the baby." He paused, letting the words fall like stones. "Into a silent lake. You need absolute rest. This means no climbing stairs, no strenuous efforts, no dealing with stressful situations. And most importantly, you need emotional support. Pregnancy is not just a physical matter, it's emotional too." Frederick was pale. "But doctor, she has everything at home. We have a housekeeper who takes care of everything. She doesn't need to do anything." Dr. Henry adjusted his glasses and looked at Frederick with an expression that mixed patience and firmness. "Mr. Frederick, taking care of everything doesn't mean taking care of her. Your wife needs attention, presence, someone who listens to what she's feeling." He turned to Julia. "What do you feel at home? Do you feel safe, supported?" Julia opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked at Frederick, who watched her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Would it be safe to speak? Would he believe her? Or would he think she was being dramatic, as always? Tears began to flow before she could control them. "I feel alone," she finally whispered. "I feel like no one sees me." Dr. Henry nodded, as if he expected exactly that answer. "I'll be frank with you. If the situation doesn't change, this pregnancy could have serious complications. Preeclampsia, premature birth, fetal distress. I'm not trying to scare you, but you need to understand the gravity. Julia needs a calm, safe, and loving environment." He looked at Frederick. "And she needs you." On the way back home, the silence was even heavier. Frederick didn't say a word. Julia looked out the window, watching the city lights blur as tears filled her eyes. When they arrived, Martha was waiting at the door, her hands crossed in front of her body, her expression carefully neutral. "How is she, sir?" Frederick ignored the question and helped Julia inside. He took her directly to the bedroom, helped her lie down and covered her with the duvet. "Rest," he said, his voice hoarse. "We'll talk tomorrow." But Julia couldn't rest. Her heart was racing, her mind full of questions and fears. She heard the bedroom door close and then heard muffled voices coming from the hallway. Frederick and Martha were talking. She dragged herself to the door and pressed her ear against the wood. "What exactly does she do during the day, Martha?" Frederick's voice had a tone Julia had never heard before. Harsh, demanding. "I take care of her, sir. I make sure she has everything she needs." Martha sounded defensive. "The doctor said she's overwhelmed. How is that possible if you're taking care of everything?" There was a long pause. Julia imagined Martha carefully choosing her words. "With all due respect, Mr. Frederick, your wife is very sensitive. Any small task seems like a great effort for her. I just try to keep her active, as specialists recommend. But perhaps I overdid it. I'll be more careful." Frederick didn't respond immediately. Julia could feel the tension in the air even through the closed door. Finally, he said, "I'm going to stay home longer. I need to see for myself what's happening." Julia returned to bed, her heart pounding. Was Frederick finally starting to realize, or would Martha manage to manipulate him once more? The next morning, Frederick did not go to work. He had breakfast with Julia, something that hadn't happened in months. They talked about simple things, the weather, preparations for the baby's arrival, the names they were considering. Julia felt strange, as if she were in a dream. It was so rare to have his attention that she almost didn't know how to react. Martha was visibly uncomfortable. She came in and out of the room with flimsy excuses, trying to find out what was happening. Frederick, however, ignored her. He helped Julia up the stairs, held her arm carefully, as if she were too fragile to walk alone. "Rest today," he said. "I'll take care of everything." But business doesn't wait. The next day, Frederick had to go back to the office. An urgent meeting, a contract that needed to be signed. He promised to come back early, but Julia knew that early for him meant 10 at night. And as soon as he left, Martha returned. "You told lies about me, didn't you?" Martha entered Julia's room without knocking, closing the door behind her. Her voice was low, but laced with venom. "You're trying to make me look like the villain." Julia cowered in bed. "I didn't say anything that wasn't true." "True?" Martha gave a bitter laugh. "You have no idea what the truth is. You came to this house, to this life of luxury, without having done anything to deserve it. And you think you can judge me?" Julia felt fear grip her chest. "Why are you doing this? What did I do to you?" Martha moved closer, her eyes gleaming with something that looked like pure hatred. "You didn't do anything, but this family did, and you will pay for them." Before Julia could ask more, the door opened. Rose was there, holding a tray with Julia's lunch. She looked at Martha, then at Julia, and immediately understood what was happening. "Sorry to interrupt," Rose said, her voice firm, "but I brought Mrs. Julia's lunch. The doctor said she needs to eat well." Martha shot Rose an icy glare but left the room without saying anything else. Rose placed the tray on the bedside table and approached Julia. "Is she okay?" Julia shook her head, tears streaming freely now. "No, Rose, I'm not okay, and I don't know what to do." Rose sat on the edge of the bed, something she would never normally do. She took Julia's hand in hers. "I see what happens here, Mrs. Julia. I see everything, and I can't stay silent anymore." She took a deep breath, as if making a difficult decision. "I have proof." Julia's eyes widened. "Proof?" Rose nodded. "I've recorded some moments, on my phone. Not much, but enough. I didn't know if I should show it, but after yesterday, after seeing Mr. Frederick worried, I think it's time." Hope. For the first time in months, Julia felt hope. "You would do that for me?" "I do it because it's the right thing," Rose said simply. "No one deserves to go through what you're going through." That afternoon, while Martha was busy with other tasks, Rose showed Julia the recordings. They were short clips, filmed discreetly. Martha ordering Julia to carry heavy laundry baskets. Martha making cruel comments about Julia's weight. Martha forcing her to go up and down stairs unnecessarily, and most shockingly, a recording of Martha on the phone, talking about revenge, about making the family pay. Julia watched everything with a broken heart. Seeing her own humiliation captured on video was painful, but also liberating. Finally, she had proof. Finally, someone would believe her. When Frederick came home that night, earlier than expected, Julia was waiting for him in the living room. She was nervous, her hands trembling, but determined. "Frederick, I need you to see something, and I need you to listen to me until the end." Without interrupting. Frederick sat down, his expression tired but attentive. Julia began to speak. She told him everything from the beginning. The small cruelties, the poisonous comments, the dangerous tasks, the constant fear. And when he started to show doubt, she showed him the videos. Frederick watched in silence. With each video, his face grew paler, his hands clenched tighter on the arms of the armchair. When it was over, he sat still, processing everything he had seen and heard. Julia waited, barely able to breathe. Finally, he raised his face. His eyes were red, not from tears, but from suppressed anger. "How did I not see this? How did I let this happen?" Julia had no answer. She simply extended her hand and he took it, squeezing tightly, as if holding on to a lifeline in a shipwreck. Frederick stood up and walked to the door leading to the staff quarters. His voice echoed through the house as he called Martha. She appeared with that polite smile, but it dissolved when she saw Frederick's expression. "Yes, sir? I want you out of my house. Now." Frederick's voice was firm, controlled, but laden with a fury that startled even Julia. "I don't care where you go or what you do, but you leave now or I call the police." Martha tried to argue, tried to explain herself, but Frederick gave no quarter. He escorted her to her room, supervised as she packed her bags, and ensured she left the property. When the gate closed behind Martha's car, Frederick returned inside and found Julia still sitting in the living room, trembling. He knelt in front of her, holding her face with both hands. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have seen it. I should have been here. I failed you." Julia hugged him and finally cried. Not tears of fear or loneliness, but of relief, of liberation. It was as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Frederick held her for a long time, whispering apologies, promising changes, swearing he would never let this happen again. But as they embraced in that room, neither of them realized that the story was far from over. Martha had left, yes, but the seed of revenge she had planted was still there, hidden in the shadows, waiting to germinate. And in the following weeks, when peace finally seemed to have returned to that house, small signs would begin to appear. Things out of place. Silent phone calls. A persistent feeling that someone was watching them. The battle had been won, but the war was just beginning. The first few weeks after Martha's departure were like breathing fresh air after months of suffocation. Julia woke up without that knot in her stomach, without the fear of encountering the housekeeper's judgmental gaze around every corner of the house. Frederick kept his promise to be more present. He reorganized his schedule, delegated tasks, cancelled meetings that weren't absolutely essential. For the first time since they were married, he had lunch at home. For the first time, he truly listened to her. Their conversations changed. They were no longer superficial exchanges about the weather or appointments. They were real conversations. Frederick wanted to know how she felt, not just physically but emotionally. He wanted to know about her fears, her hopes for when the baby was born, her dreams that had been put on hold. And Julia, little by little, began to trust again, began to open up again, began to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, they could build something real together. Rose remained in the house now with an even more important role. She was not just the cleaner, but a comforting presence, an ally. Frederick increased her salary and gave her more autonomy. "Rose deserves much more than I was paying her," he told Julia one night. "She saved you. She saved our family." Frederick also hired a new employee to help with household tasks, but this time it was different. He and Julia interviewed each candidate together, asked questions, checked references personally. They chose Celia, a 40-year-old woman, a mother of 3. with a genuine smile and a maternal energy that immediately put Julia at ease. "You don't need to do anything but rest, Mrs. Julia," Celia said on the first day. "I'm here to make your life easier, not to complicate it." Prenatal appointments became important events. Frederick didn't miss any. He held Julia's hand during exams, was captivated by the ultrasound images, asked Dr. Henry questions as if he were studying for a test. The baby was growing well, despite everything. A girl. They had already decided on the name, Sophia. Frederick liked to put his hand on Julia's belly at night and talk to Sophia, telling her about the room. He was preparing for her, about the walks they would take together, about how he would always protect her. But not everything was perfect. Julia still had nightmares. She dreamt of Martha appearing in the room, that fake smile on her lips, that voice whispering threats. She would wake up sweating, her heart racing, and needed a few minutes to remember that Martha was gone. Frederick would hug her, tell her everything was fine, that she was safe. But Julia couldn't completely shake that feeling that something was wrong. And then the signs began. First it was the phone. Calls. That dropped as soon as Julia answered. Silence on the other end of the line, followed by the dial tone. Once or twice it could be a mistake, but when it happened for the 10th time in a week, Julia knew it wasn't a coincidence. She told Frederick, who was concerned but tried to be rational. "It must be telemarketing, my love, or someone who dialed wrong. I'll ask to block unknown numbers." Then there were things out of place, small things, subtle. The flower vase that Julia was sure she had left on the living room table appeared on the hallway dresser. The wedding photo that was on the shelf was turned to the wall. The keychain that Frederick always left in the same place disappeared and reappeared days later in another room. Each time Julia mentioned it, Frederick had a logical explanation. Celia must have moved it while cleaning. Rose might have accidentally bumped it. "You're tired. You might have moved it and forgotten." But Julia knew. She felt it. Someone was entering the house. Someone was messing with things. And that someone wanted her to know. Rose also noticed. She found Julia one morning standing in the living room, staring fixedly at the window. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Julia?" Julia turned, her eyes wide. "Rose, did you move that painting?" She pointed to a painting on the wall depicting a sunset. Rose frowned. "No, madam. Why would I move it?" "Because last night it was centered. Now it's crooked, and it wasn't the wind because the windows were closed." The two women exchanged glances. Rose approached the window, checked the locks. Everything was closed. But then she noticed something. There were subtle scratches on the frame, fresh marks on the wood. "Someone tried to force this window," Rose said, her voice low. Julia's blood ran cold. "We have to tell Frederick." Frederick initially didn't believe it. Not entirely. He checked the entire house, examined every window, every door. The security system was working normally. No alarm had gone off. No camera had captured strange movement. But then he found something that changed everything. In the back garden, partially hidden among the bushes, there were footprints in the damp soil. High-heeled footprints. Footprints that led to the living room window and then away towards the wall. Frederick felt fear grip his chest. He picked up the phone and called the security company. "I want additional cameras installed tomorrow, in the back, on the sides, in every blind spot. And I want a night guard, someone to patrol the property." He looked at Julia, who was sitting on the sofa, her hands trembling. "No one will hurt you, I promise." But promises are sometimes not enough. That night, Julia couldn't sleep. She lay beside Frederick, listening to his deep breathing, envying how he managed to rest. She stared at the ceiling, counting the shadows the moonlight created through the curtains. And then she heard it. A low sound, almost imperceptible. A creak, as if someone was walking slowly in the hallway. Julia sat up in bed, her heart pounding. She waited, listening attentively. Nothing. Maybe it was imagination. Maybe it was the house settling as old houses do. But then she heard it again, closer this time, and a shadow quickly passed through the crack under the door. She nudged Frederick hard. "Frederick! Frederick! Wake up! Someone's out there!" Frederick woke immediately, his protective instinct triggered. He got up, went to the bedside table, and picked up a baseball bat he had placed there after finding the footprints. "Stay. Here," he whispered to Julia. "Lock the door behind me." He opened the door slowly, peeking into the hallway. It was dark, only the faint night light plugged in near the stairs. Frederick turned on the hallway light. No one was there. He walked slowly, checking each room. The office empty. The guest room empty. The living room empty. He was starting to think Julia had imagined it when he noticed something strange. The back door, which led to the garden, was ajar. He was absolutely sure he had locked it before going to sleep. Frederick rushed back to the room. "Get the phone, call the police, now." Julia obeyed, her hands trembling so much she could barely dial. The police arrived in 15 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. They searched the house and the garden. They found the back door definitely forced open. They found more footprints, and they found something that made Julia's blood run cold. On the living room mirror, written in red lipstick, was a message. "You don't deserve this life." The handwriting was unmistakable. Julia would recognize it anywhere. It was Martha's. The police took photos, collected fingerprints, filed a report. They recommended that Frederick hire private security immediately. "We'll look for this woman, but in the meantime you need to protect yourselves, especially with your wife pregnant." The next morning, the house was transformed. Frederick had hired 2 security guards who rotated shifts. There were cameras in every corner. All windows had reinforced locks. The house that once seemed like a prison of appearances now seemed like a fortress. But even with all the security, Julia didn't feel safe. She knew Martha was intelligent, manipulative, patient. If she wanted revenge, she would find a way. Frederick tried to remain calm for Julia, but inside he was consumed by guilt. He had brought Martha into their lives. He hadn't believed Julia when she tried to warn him. And now, his wife and daughter were in danger because of his decisions. He dedicated himself completely to finding out who Martha really was. He hired a private investigator, a discreet and efficient man named Robert. Robert worked quickly. In a week, he returned with information that changed everything. Martha was not who she claimed to be. Her real name was Martha Sterling, and she was the sister of Lucy Sterling, a former employee of Frederick's company. Lucy had been fired 3 years ago for embezzlement. She had stolen money from the company, and when discovered, Frederick did not hesitate to dismiss and prosecute her. Lucy lost everything: her reputation, her job, her family, and a year later, unable to cope with the shame, she took her own life. Martha blamed Frederick. In her pain-distorted mind, he was responsible for her sister's death, and so she planned her revenge. She changed her name, created false references, infiltrated Frederick's life through working in the house. And the plan was simple and cruel: to destroy his family in the same way she felt Frederick had destroyed hers. When Frederick told Julia everything, she felt a mixture of horror and sadness. Horror at what Martha was capable of doing. Sadness for the pain that led Martha to this point. But also clarity. Finally, everything made sense. The cruelties, the manipulations, the thinly veiled hatred. Robert also found out where Martha was. She had rented a small apartment a few blocks from the mansion. She was watching them, studying their movements, waiting for the right moment for the next step of her plan. The police went there, but the apartment was empty. Martha had disappeared. Julia entered her 8th month of pregnancy, living under constant surveillance. Every shadow was a threat, every noise a reason for panic. Frederick barely left the house, conducting meetings by video conference, signing documents that were brought to him. Rose and Celia were always nearby, attentive to anything out of the ordinary. And then, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, when the sun streamed gently through the windows, and it seemed that perhaps, just perhaps, everything would be all right, the phone rang. Frederick answered. It was the police. They had found Martha. She was admitted to a psychiatric hospital in a state of delusion. She had tried to break into a house thinking it was Frederick's mansion, and had been restrained by the residents. She was undergoing mandatory treatment under medical and police supervision. Frederick hung up the phone and hugged Julia. It's over, it's really over. Julia wanted to believe. She wanted to allow herself to relax, but something inside her, a maternal instinct perhaps, or just the wisdom born of suffering, whispered that the story was not yet finished, that as long as Martha was alive, as long as that hatred still burned in her chest, they would never be completely safe. But for now, for that moment, she let Frederick embrace her. She allowed herself to believe in peace, because Sophia was almost ready to come into the world, and Julia needed to be whole to receive her. 3 weeks had passed since Martha was admitted, 3 weeks of relative peace, although the shadow of what happened still hung over the house like a stubborn cloud, refusing to completely dissipate. Julia was enormous now, Sophia occupying every inch of space in her womb. Walking was an arduous task, sleeping an impossibility. She spent nights awake, constantly changing position, feeling her daughter move and kick as if she too was eager to meet the world outside. Frederick was different. He wasn't just more present, but transformed. The man who only thought about business had given way to someone who understood that there is something much more important than money and prestige. He had learned that success without family to share it with is just loneliness disguised as achievement. He cooked for Julia, even if the dishes came out imperfect. He read books on parenting, jotting down tips in a notebook he carried everywhere. He personally assembled Sophia's crib, consulting online tutorials, his hands more accustomed to signing contracts than holding a screwdriver. The baby's room was a dream, walls painted in soft yellow, delicate mobiles hanging from the ceiling, shelves full of stuffed animals and children's books. Frederick had chosen every detail carefully, always consulting Julia, always wanting her opinion. They spent hours there, sitting in the nursing armchair, imagining what it would be like when Sophia arrived, what it would be like to hear her cry for the first time, hold her tiny fingers, see her first smile. Rose and Celia became an essential part of the family. They were not just employees, but confidants, friends, almost like aunts to Sophia even before she was born. Rose knitted blankets. Celia prepared nutritious and delicious meals. Both made sure Julia didn't lift a finger. When Julia protested, saying she felt useless, Celia smiled and said, "Your only task now is to bring this girl into the world healthy. Leave the rest to us." But the peace was interrupted on a Thursday morning. Julia was having coffee when Frederick's phone rang. It was Robert, the investigator. Martha had escaped from the psychiatric hospital. No, one knew how, but she had disappeared during the change of nurses' shifts. Authorities were searching, but so far no sign of her. Fear returned like a wave. Frederick immediately reinforced security. He called the security guards, alerted the police, asked for patrols to pass by the house more frequently. Julia felt panic tighten her chest. What if Martha showed up? What if she tried something? Sophia would be born in a matter of days. She was vulnerable, defenseless. Frederick hugged her, trying to convey a calm he didn't feel himself. "I won't let anything happen to you both. I swear on my life I'll stay here by your side every second. She won't get close." That night, Julia began to feel contractions. First light, spaced, almost imperceptible. But over the hours they grew stronger, more frequent. Frederick timed each one, his phone in hand, his face tense with concentration. When the contractions were 5 minutes apart, he called Dr. Henry. "It's time," the doctor confirmed. "Come to the hospital." The trip to the hospital was tense. Frederick drove fast but carefully, his eyes alternating between the road and Julia, who breathed deeply with each contraction. The security guards accompanied. Them in another car, vigilant. Frederick couldn't shake the fear that Martha might appear, that she might try something at the moment they were most vulnerable. But the road was empty, quiet. They arrived at the hospital without incident. The medical team was already waiting for them. Julia was taken to the delivery room, Frederick by her side, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement. The labor was long, exhausting. Hours dragged on as Julia struggled, sweated, cried. Frederick never let go of her hand. He was there, solid as a rock, repeating, "You can do it, you're strong, I'm here." And then, when exhaustion seemed insurmountable, when Julia thought she had no more strength, a cry echoed through the room, a loud, indignant cry, full of life. Sophia had arrived, Dr. Henry wrapped her in a blanket and placed her on Julia's chest. The baby was perfect. Small, pink, eyes squeezed shut, fists clenched. Julia looked at that little face and felt a love so overwhelming she thought her heart would explode. Frederick was crying. Tears streamed freely down his face as he gently touched Sophia's tiny head. "Our daughter," he whispered. "Our little girl." The first few days in the hospital were a bubble of happiness. Julia learned to breastfeed, to change diapers, to interpret Sophia's every cry. Frederick didn't leave the room. He slept in the uncomfortable armchair, woke up at every sound, was always ready to help. Rose and Celia visited, bringing flowers and gifts, crying with emotion as they held Sophia for the first time. But reality returned when it was time to go home. Frederick organized everything with military precision. The security guards checked every corner of the hospital before taking Julia and Sophia to the car. The journey back was made in silence, everyone attentive, vigilant. When they arrived at the mansion, Frederick carried Sophia while helping Julia out of the car. The house was quiet, lit, welcoming. The following weeks were a whirlwind of learning. Sleepless nights, endless diapers, feedings every 3 hours, but also moments of pure magic. Sophia's first smile, which made Julia and Frederick stop everything just to look. The way she held Frederick's finger with her tiny hand. The sounds she made, almost as if trying to talk. Frederick had transformed into a dedicated father. He woke up in the middle of the night to get water for Julia while she breastfed. He changed diapers without complaining. He sang off-key lullabies that made Sophia stop crying and look at him with those curious little eyes. The company? It continued to run, but now with a competent management team that Frederick had finally learned to trust. He discovered that delegating was not weakness, but wisdom. Julia flourished, not just as a mother, but as a woman. She had found her strength through suffering. She had learned that she was worth more than appearances, more than what others expected of her. And she had learned that true love is not one that is born easy and beautiful, but one that is built through daily choices, through forgiveness, through presence. But Martha still haunted her thoughts. 2 months had passed since her escape, and no sign of her. The police had stopped actively searching. Robert continued to investigate, but the clues had gone cold. Frederick began to believe that perhaps Martha had left, given up on her revenge. But Julia wasn't so sure. And then, on a rainy April afternoon, the doorbell rang. Frederick went to answer, one of the security guards by his side. Through the camera they saw a thin woman, short dark hair, simple clothes. She held an envelope. When Frederick opened the door, protected by the guard, the woman extended the envelope. "I'm a social worker," she explained. "I was asked to deliver this personally." Frederick took the envelope cautiously and the woman left. Inside was a letter. The handwriting was Martha's. Frederick felt his blood run cold, but forced himself to read. The letter was long, confusing in some points, but its essence was clear. Martha asked for forgiveness. She wrote about her pain, about how the loss of her sister had distorted her judgment, how hatred had consumed her soul. She recognized that nothing Frederick did justified her revenge. She recognized that Julia was innocent, that Sophia was innocent, and she promised that she would never approach them again. The letter ended by saying that Martha was undergoing treatment in another county at a specialized clinic, that she was trying to rebuild her life, to deal with her grief in a healthy way, and that she hoped one day to be able to forgive herself for what she had done. Frederick showed the letter to Julia. She read it with tears in her eyes, not tears of fear, but of sadness. Sadness for Martha, for everything she had lost, for how pain can transform a person into something they never wanted to be. Julia didn't know if she could completely forgive, but she could understand. And understanding was a start. "Do you think it's real?" Frederick asked. "Or is it a manipulation?" Julia looked at Sophia, sleeping peacefully in her crib. "I think pain is real. Anger is real. But I also believe that people can change, if they choose to." She looked at Frederick. "You changed. We changed." Frederick hugged Julia and Sophia, the 2 people who gave meaning to his life. "You're right. and we will continue to change, grow, improve. As a family. Months passed. Sophia grew, began to crawl, then to walk. Her first steps were taken in the mansion's garden, amidst laughter and applause from Julia, Frederick, Rose, and Celia. Martha did not return. Letters continued to arrive occasionally, always respectful, always from afar. Julia never responded, but she kept each one. Perhaps one day, when the wounds were completely healed, she would be able to write back. But for now it was enough to know that Martha was trying to heal too. The mansion was no longer a prison of appearances. It was a home, full of life, love, laughter. Frederick had learned that presence is worth more than presence. That time is the most valuable resource we can give to those we love. Julia had learned her own strength, her voice, her worth, and Sophia grew up surrounded by true, not performative love. Love that was expressed in tight hugs, in bedtime stories, in constant presence. On a special night, when Sophia turned 1 year old, they organized a small party. Just family. Rose brought her children. Celia brought her grandchildren. There was cake, balloons, much joy. As Sophia destroyed her piece of cake with her little hands, getting messy and making everyone laugh, Frederick looked around. He looked at those people who were his true wealth. Not the buildings he built, not the contracts he signed, but those people there sharing that simple and perfect moment. He stood up and raised a glass of juice as Julia was still breastfeeding. "I want to make a toast." He waited for everyone to pick up their glasses. To second chances, to change, to the family we choose to build, every day through our actions, not just our words. And to Sophia, who taught us that true love is not one that seems perfect, but one that remains even when everything falls apart. Everyone toasted, glasses clinking softly. Sophia clapped her hands, not understanding but happy with the energy around her. Julia held Frederick's hand, and in that squeeze was everything that needed to be said. Forgiveness for not having seen, gratitude for having changed, love built not on initial passion, but on the daily choice to be present, to listen, to care. That night, after everyone had left and Sophia was sleeping peacefully in her crib, Frederick and Julia stood on the balcony looking at the stars. "Do you think we're safe now?" Julia asked. Frederick pulled her closer. "I think safety isn't about the absence of threats, but about knowing that no matter what happens, we face it together. And I know that with you by my side, I can face anything." Julia smiled. She finally believed it. After everything they had been through, all the suffering and all the tears, they had found something real, something worth protecting, nurturing, cultivating for the rest of their lives. Because, in the end, it's not the mansions or the luxury cars that make a life worthwhile. It's moments like that, under the stars, knowing you're not alone, knowing someone sees you, hears you, chooses you every day. That, Julia realized, is true luxury, and she finally had it. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Julia and Frederick's story has touched your heart. If you were moved by their journey, by the fight against manipulation, by the transformation of love, and by the power of second chances, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what resonated with you most. Every day we bring intense stories like this, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, showing that even in the most difficult situations, it is possible to find light, redemption, and true love. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with a new story that will stir your emotions.